The brain. If you remember from lecture on Monday, the first thing that we talked about were the lobes of the brain. And the lobes of the brain are synonymous with the bones of the skull. So the most rostral bone of the skull, if you talk about not facial bones, but skull bones, were the frontal bones. So this is the frontal lobe of the brain right here. The parietal lobes of the brain are on either side of the longitudinal fissure here. So if this is our fissure, these are the parietal bones here. The temporal bones are on the side of the brain, just like our temple is on the side, so temporal are on the side. And the occipital bone, or the occipital lobe, if you remember the occipital bone, it's on the back part or the base of the skull. So this right here is the occipital lobe. If you look in your book, there's another lobe called the piriform lobe. And the definition for the piriform lobe is medial to the temporal lobe. So temporal lobes are here. Medial to that is on the ventral side, and these are the piriform lobes right here. So the temporal lobes are on this side, the piriform are medial to them, or more towards the middle. These were the frontal lobe right here. Ventral to the frontal lobe on the top part of the brain right here are the olfactory bulbs. So these receive the olfactory nerves, and we'll talk about those nerves here in just a second. Some other parts on the brain, or the external structures that we want to look at, are the longitudinal fissure here. So the longitudinal fissure separates the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. This is a cerebrum here, this is the cerebellum. The transverse fissure here separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. So longitudinal fissure, two hemispheres of the cerebrum. The vermis is this little bulge right here, and it separates the two hemispheres of the cerebellum. So both have hemispheres. One has an inward separation, the other has a bulge separation. That's the vermis longitudinal fissure. If you look at the brain, you can see that the surface goes up and down. You have outward bulges and inward depressions. The outward bulge is called the gyre. And the inward bulge, which in a lot of the specimens will look like the lines, those are called the sulci. So to me, the word sulci sounds like sucky. So I think if something sucks, it goes down. So the sulci are what goes down. So that's it as far as external structures go. And now we'll work on the actually separating, looking at the cranial nerves and some of the parts. Can you guys hand me a pair of scissors? So this right here is dura mater. So if you remember, the dura mater is the outermost covering, or outermost meninge that is directly contacting the skull. So this is dura mater. And embedded in the dura mater is the pituitary gland right here. So this is the pituitary. Most of the time when we have a brain dissected for a quiz or for a final exam, we'll have the pituitary set out like this, and that will be tagged. So if you see something that looks odd and like trash, basically, or something we would throw away during dissection, that's the pituitary gland. That's what we're looking for. And once we remove the pituitary, though, we start to expose some of the cranial nerves. And when you guys dissect, I want you to be really careful and cut close to the dura mater so that you leave the cranial nerves intact and you're not taking them off with the pituitary. So if you remember from Monday, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And I'm not that mean that I would make you guys know all 12, but there are 4 that are really easy to find on the brain, and then I want you guys to know their name and the number of them. So the first one that we'll do is the olfactory nerve. So these were the olfactory bulbs. The olfactory nerve lies right on top. This is an olfactory nerve. Okay, so that's going to be the most rostral. If we keep going caudal, we have the optic nerve. This is an optic nerve here, so you have one going to one eye, and then if they weren't cut off, you would have another going to the other eye. So that X is called the optic chiasm. Each nerve goes to a single eye, they cross with the optic chiasm. Caudal to that, we have the ocular motor nerves right here. So oculo means eye, motor means movement. These are what allow the eye to move. So optic nerves are for vision, ocular motor or for movement of the eyeball. And then we have the largest nerve, the largest cranial nerve, which lies right here on the brain stem, and it's the trigeminal nerve. So it's the largest of the 12 cranial nerves. So I want you guys to know the name and numbers for the olfactory, the optic, the ocular motor, and the trigeminal nerves. Don't worry with the other cranial nerves. The other 8 you don't have to know. Okay, next what you guys will do is you'll actually take the brain, separate it at the longitudinal fissure, and as you do that, you should be able to get to a point where you'll come to a membrane. So you can see the the hemispheres are physically separated. They don't touch each other. There's actually a layer of tissue that's keeping them from touching each other. But as we move down, we want those two hemispheres to be able to communicate. So you'll come to a layer of tissue that's a barrier between the cerebrum and the ventricles on the bottom that hold spinal fluid. And if you look, it's a little white barrier from the dorsal side. See it right there? That white barrier, if you remember from Monday, runs across both hemispheres, allowing them to communicate, and it's called the corpus callosum. So what you guys will do is you'll actually identify the corpus callosum, then you're going to use your probe and go through it. And what we'll end up doing is taking the cerebrum off of the midbrain and the brainstem so we can identify the parts on the brain. The easiest way to do this is use your probe and just go around as best you can. To save time, I've already done it over here. So you'll end up with two hemispheres of the brain. Which one's going to go? This is how I would be if I were a brain surgeon. Like, I think those parts would. Okay, so this is what the cerebrum looked like. Two hemispheres. When you open them up, you have the corpus callosum, which was that white part we identified from the dorsal surface. This is it right here. Everything right here is the septum pellucidum. So the corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres. The septum pellucidum protects the corpus callosum from all of the spinal fluid that's right here. So this is the ventricle of the brain that houses spinal fluid. So together they look like this. This is where we have the diencephalon, the mesencephalon, the myencephalon. So if you remember, the diencephalon had the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. This right here is the thalamus. And we'll cut it open here in a second and see what the inside looks like. But how it was presented was the pituitary is lying on top. The pituitary is releasing hormones that influence the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So hormones are released. They pass through this little funnel here, the infundibulum. So the funnel, infundibulum, between the pituitary and the thalamus, infundibulum. Beneath the infundibulum is a mammillary body, which is this right here. So if you ever get lost on a lot of the specimens, the mammillary body lies in between the ocular motor nerves. The optic chiasm is on top of it. The infundibulum lies right in the middle of all of this. So the infundibulum, pituitary hormones are released from the pituitary gland, go through the infundibulum. They contact the hypothalamus first. So the hypo means below the thalamus. So this here is the hypothalamus. You can see as they come in, hypothalamus first. This circular area right here is the thalamus. So this is the thalamus. Next we have the pineal body and the rostral and caudal colliculi. This little piece of thing that often gets taken off is the pineal body. It's what secretes melatonin. These are the rostral colliculi here. If you fold them over, right behind the rostral colliculi, these bulbs right here are the caudal colliculi. Remember, these are what houses the auditory and visual reflex centers. So the loud noises of the bright lights that cause a reflex, it's in the rostral and caudal colliculi. This is the cerebellum, so it's the word for little brain, right? If we cut open the cerebellum, we see the arbor vitae, or the tree of life, on the inside. Underneath the cerebellum, on the most caudal part of the brainstem, is the medulla oblongata right here. So from the inside, the only way we see the medulla oblongata is if we split the cerebellum. On the bottom side, This is the medulla oblongata here, and this is the pons. It's the little bulge right there is the pons. And that's it.